Hello again, everybody, and welcome to a super-duper special edition of the Jim Cornette Experience, where we're going to do a deep dive all the way into the darkest recesses of the Great American Bash 1986, live on tour, and more. Plus, I'm slappy today. Your packages have begun winging their way to you as we speak, and we'll talk more about that. But to join me in doing so, my cohort and co-host, Hawaiian Brian, the podcasting lion, the king of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network, Mr. Co-host to you, the former post office playboy, although the new girl Bree likes your voice too. He's Swammy's Pappy, the proprietor of the French Toast Chateau, your friend and his, the great Kreskin. No, it's Brian last, everybody.
Aloha, Jim. An amazing pleasure to be here once again. Tell me about this Bree.
Well, Bree says, your co-host has a wonderful voice, too.
So she's new, and someone who works there said, hey, you got to listen to his show. That guy who comes in every day with all those packages, you got to hear his show?
Well, I am somewhat of especially over the last week. Now, every morning when I'm coming in, George will just yell, Bree, Jim's here. So she comes out and opens up a separate window because I'm bringing, this morning was over 200 pounds of packages to be shipped out to the faithful. And Bree, I've inherited Bree now that Susie's moved on to the bigger and better job. I think she's working underneath the Postmaster General in D.C. now. But Bree has inherited me.
Well, let me ask you this. Here's a tough question. Would everything have been smoother with Susie, or is Bree doing a good job?
No, Bree is doing a very good job. Of course, there would have been the more familiarity with Susie because of the constant repetition over the last few years of the mailing process, but yet Bree, because she's worked at the plant, she's used to high volume, so she's just, boom, boom, boom. They can't give me just any old amateur, anybody's just come from, the local Target or whatever. They got to give me plant people that have experience in dealing with pressure situations. Speaking of which, we did the drive-thru this week, but I was asleep when we did it, so I don't remember. We talked about this, but I don't remember what I said. So pardon me if I chew my food twice. But thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The limited edition hardcover Behind the Curtain, signed and numbered by me, sold out the 1,500 copies in just over 4 days, leading to a mass chaos around the castle here, as we did not expect, nor humbly do we deserve that level of feedback and support from you folks. But once the initial euphoria of selling something out that quickly and creating another collector's item that will, I'm not like those collector's plates. I'm never doing plates because I've heard some of those plates can go down, but my stuff doesn't. But then the logistical situation set in of, okay, approximately 1,500 people. Now, some people ordered more than one book because they wanted a Christmas present for their friends, whatever, the investors in the bunch. But at the same time, some people also ordered without ordering books, the normal business. So around 1,500 different people ordered, and because some people had just ordered books, but many people ordered more items, DVD or a T-shirt or another book or a picture or whatever the case. 1,500 people ordered 2,000 separate items, 90% of which need to be personally hand-signed by me and personalized in some way over a 96-hour period. If you want to weigh it, that's 2,000 pounds of merchandise without the packing materials surrounding them. Which also we found that when you do pack these things in packing materials, it does make them bulkier. So I've got these giant cardboard boxes that I take individual packages in the post office to. I've got a hand dolly. These giant cardboard boxes are about 50 pounds apiece. So I'm taking in every morning 200 pounds. Monday morning, 200 pounds. Tuesday morning, 200 pounds. Wednesday morning, 200 pounds. I've successfully mailed out about 600 pounds of merchandise, ladies and gentlemen. We've got an assembly line process going on. We've separated everything into categories. Everybody did get a legitimate chute number on their order of the book, but it may not be delivered in order. For example, every order has a book number, but some may go out quickly because it's just a book and not another package we have to pack earlier, et cetera, et cetera. But tomorrow and Friday, well, actually tomorrow, as you hear this, will be Friday, ladies and gentlemen, but we're taping this tomorrow and Friday and Saturday and Sunday in 4 days. I believe I can have, Brian Last, all the domestic orders ready to go out Monday. Well, they'll be going out, but ready to go out or have gone out, all the domestic stuff by Monday morning. I believe this in my heart, as long as I don't sleep. But you know the international rib, right?
For a book? What?
Well, the international rib is to send an international package, since people got stupid with sending shit through the mail. You have to fill out a customs form. And with your name and address and the person you're shipping to's name and address and the contents of the package, and you got to sign it. And then at the other end of the postal equation, at the window, the clerk has to enter it in by hand in their system. So each customs form to fill out on this end, let's say it takes 3 minutes. Well, there's a couple of hundred international orders. So that's approximately 10 hours of customs forms time. So Stacey's putting the return address on a huge stack of forms, and then so we can fill the rest out from there. And next week, ladies and gentlemen, if you live around the world and you ordered from me, I love you and I thank you. But International Week is next week at Cornette's Collectibles. That's where every day we're going to be taking international packages on a rotating basis, because it takes about 3 to 5 minutes per package at the window, and there's a couple hundred of these, so do the math on that.
Any carpal tunnel issues with all the signatures and all the inscriptions?
No, I'm a man, Brian. Men don't get carpal tunnel syndrome. And besides, that's my racket hand. I've been using that hand to grip my racket all my life.
That's right.
And so that hand, I could Von Erich claw somebody into submission with that hand, because of my habit of writing everything and my gripping of my racket. That's what it's going to be called from now on. I was gripping my racket when she walked in. And anyway, so but I do encourage everybody, even though my hardcover edition is sold out, and please, everyone, I'm begging, I'm pleading, if you've ordered, it's all being addressed. That's all I'm doing from morning till night for the next week and a half or so. But give me a little leeway here. And don't get left out, because now I'm hearing that the softcover edition that's available on Amazon or any book dealer, comic shop, if they don't have it in stock, chastise them, suitably chasten them. But Behind the Curtain was #1 seller on Amazon, wrestling book category. I guess that's like being the nicest guy in prison, maybe. But anyway, I'm hearing now that comic shops and live brick and mortar locations are selling out of this thing, and it was #1 on Amazon. So the print run was limited in some respect. I don't know how many. I've got to find that out. We didn't expect it would sell out in the first week, but it apparently may very well be. So order soon, not from me, because I don't have the soft covers. I had the hard covers. Now they're gone. They were snatched up. Don't let the same thing happen to you on the soft covers. Get them. Go to Amazon. Go to your bookstore. Go some goddamn where. Clear the airwaves. Behind the Curtain is on sale. Okay. I've got an update real quick on also something last week from the program. When I offered to give Jordan Butterface Grace $250 or contribute to the teacher's charity to buy school supplies on her behalf, or I'd double it to $500 if she'd quit the business. But I haven't heard any feedback on that. I don't know if that, have you heard anything?
No, I don't think she's going to accept those terms there.
All right, but anyway, I said, somebody send me the information on where I can, to the teacher's charity that helps them buy school supplies for needy kids. And apparently there is not one centrally located version of this, like the Humane Society or whatever. It's a bunch of individuals, which this is a sad state of affairs and commentary on America. But a bunch of individuals putting up GoFundMes or whatever to for their students or whatever the case. So I don't know what to do now, because And now if you contribute this just out of the blue to one person, that seems to be favoring them over another person. And I don't know who's getting this money. So I still have $250. Can somebody tell me an accredited national charity that somehow helps kids who don't have the money for school supplies to get them, that I can give this 200? It seems like if they don't have one, they ought to have one of those things somewhere, doesn't it? You?
Yeah, you know who may know? Mary Furpo. She's a teacher. If you hear
There
this,
you go.
Mary, if you hear this, get in touch and let us know if you know of anything.
If she hears this, like she would ever not listen to this program when it first came out. She's one of our most dedicated listeners. And
well, it's back to school season. It could be a delayed listen.
Well, okay, that would be a good reason. But she's beautiful and lovely and well educated and has all the book readings as smarts. So Mary will know. Mary, tell us where to send. She'll say my house, right? $250 to teacher. But anyway, we have a news. Actually, we have a couple of sponsors this week on the program, and Brian, we have a couple that you don't know about. I'm going to spring this on you because times are tough here at the castle. You know, I barely grossed six figures last week, and times are tough. So I've had to take some advertising, and you don't know about this, but because I'm getting paid and you're not. But I figure if you can't beat them, then you might as well join them. So I'm accepting advertising from some of the current, modern, evolved wrestling promotions to advertise their events, because since everybody listens to this program, then that way people will know where to find them. So let me just read some of these advertisements I've got, Brian. Then we'll continue on with the program. First of all, on September 12th in Wartburg, Tennessee, at the VFW Hall, it's the Cosplay Wrestling Federation. They are presenting a show entitled "May the Farts Be With You," where they will all dress up as Star Wars characters and sit in the middle of the ring eating beans, Taco Bell, and Arby's till all of the 36 fans in the building can smell their farts individually. Second, on September 15th in Springfield, Missouri, at the Booze and Bovine Buffet House, we have Dinner Theater Wrestling. The Dinner Theater Wrestling Federation is presenting Death of a Salesman. They're going to kill him by putting him through a flaming table wrapped in barbed wire and covered in fluorescent light tubes.
You can keep this advertising money.
And lastly, on September 17th, and the location is one of their houses, depending on who's got the new video game and whose mother or roommate is out of town that day. The Performance Artists Wrestling Federation are presenting a show. Well, they don't title their work or advertise their matches. They all just sit in the corner and wipe each other's tears because they're all so hurt and offended that people think they're stupid. So that'll be taking place on September 17th. So just some of the new advertising that we have here at the.
You should do like a segment, like a modern take on Bowdrin the Booker, Cornette the Booker, where you watch AEW and you rebook it as stupid as they could possibly ever imagine.
I've been the booker, and I don't want to be the booker anymore. But speaking of bookers, you know what the plural of booker is, don't? Well, it's bookies. No, it's not. But but there's a segue in there somewhere from booker to bookie. We have been, ladies and gentlemen, we've been approached by a fine company. I know they use their left and right turn indicator to sponsor the program. And to be quite honest, as we mentioned, we recommend products that we use here on the program, or stuff that we know about or that we are somewhat expert in or fans of. And we know that the cult is like-minded folks. There's some things that Brian and I don't know anything about, but yet we're always open to expanding our horizons. And Brian, you're probably better up on this than I am because it's an online concern, and you at least know how to get online, where, you know, I'm challenged with that too, but neither one of us, and I know we've got some out there in the audience because I've heard them talking in Charlotte, I've heard them talking in various live events or whatever. some of our fans like more than one thing. I know that's hard to believe, but in addition to wrestling, they like the other sports, the footballs, the baseballs, the basketballs of the world, the boxings, the UFCs especially. And basically, this is something that we have been left out on because we just hadn't got into it, but we have been contacted by a firm called MyBookie that has heard about the tremendous popularity of the program and wants to advertise on Saint. And so we have agreed to basically go on an experimental journey here. We don't even have to call Timothy Leary or use any of the lysergic acid diethylamide to go on an experimental journey inside our minds, because MyBookie can take us on that journey. The new sponsors in part of the Jim Cornette experience, MyBookie, the place to bet on football every weekend, is gonna help you and me, Brian, get rich and successful, because they've got a deal. Not only do they have better bonuses and more prop bets than any other sports book, and see, automatically I'd already be lost. Thankfully, we got MyBookie to lead us through this. But they are hosting the first online handicapping super contest where the first place is guaranteed to guaranteed to win at least. It also, you can wean you away if you have a gambling problem, folks. We want to wean you away from that, so disregard this message. But first place is guaranteed to win at least $100,000, and it only costs $100 to enter.
You can't say wean your way without sounding like Dusty Rhodes.
Possibly I could sound like the Tokens, where in the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. A weem away, a weem away, a weem away, a weem away. I'll wean you away. But with MyBookie, all you got to do is pick 5 NFL games against the spread every week to climb the leaderboard and score your share of the huge cash prize pool. See, already I'd be lost, but we got MyBookie to help us out. So what we're going to do is, if anybody else wants to take this experimental journey with us, Brian, we're going to put up, it's going to be my money and your brains as usual. It's going to be my $100. I'm going to have a dog in this fight, but you're going to get on MyBookie online and you're going to pop us into this bad boy, and we're going to pick. What now?
What do you mean? So you want me to place bets? I'm going to be placing bets on behalf of you?
Yes, because you do all the online work in this partnership.
What's my share of the winnings?
Well, it'll be a little under half.
Oh, okay. I will take that. I will.
All right. Well, there you go.
That's fine terms.
But
by the way, I don't know anything about how. I don't know football. I'm not a big football guy.
That's exactly the whole reason why we got MyBookie now. Because they are going to help us through this. We're going to get on MyBookie, and I'm sure aren't they going to tell us how to do this shit?
I don't know if they tell us to, or if we actually place the bets and just they manage the bets and take care of the bets and manage the money and deliver the money.
I want them to do all those things. I want them to manage the money, take care of the money, and then deliver the money.
And I'm looking on here. I know we're talking football, but it looks like they also do other sports like hockey, basketball, and even the king of sports, baseball.
Oh, no bias there, I assume.
No, not at all.
King of sports. Baseball is about it. Like I said about Ken Resnick at the buffet at the Gathering in Charlotte. He makes watching paint dry look like a Universal Studios thrill ride. Baseball is the most boring thing. But anyway, at least you got plenty of time to bet on it while you're sitting around twiddling your fucking dick in your hand. Or gripping the racket, as they sometimes say. But anyway, basically, you go to MyBookie and you bet, you win, and they pay. That's what it says. Live in-game betting on every NFL game, rewarding player perks. And you can get up to $1,000 first deposit bonus and double your first deposit if you use promo code JCE to activate the offer. Visit MyBookie online today. What is the website that they've got now?
Well, I think you just go to MyBookie and enter the promo code, but there is one that we have for the description portion of the podcast. This website is, get your pen and paper ready, bit.ly/JimCornetteEX.
What?
Maybe we need a tiny URL.
Can we get a tiny URL for that?
bit.ly or bit.ly, I guess some people just say, but bit.ly/JimCornetteEX, or I'll tell you what, just go to MyBookie and enter the promo code JCE. It'll be a lot easier that way. Yes.
My bookie, MyBookie. But we're going to do this. And next week, we're going to get into this. And then next week, will we have won something yet?
I don't know. Listeners, you better tell me who to pick.
Well, no, doesn't my bookie tell us who to pick there? It's my bookie. You ought to tell me who to fucking pick. Hey, Jackie Fargo.
I think we go against my bookie. I think my bookie is our opponent, and we're playing against my bookie.
What?
Maybe.
Well, fuck, I thought they were on our side. Do we need to get Stephen P. New in on this?
That's a whole
I thought they were on our side.
That's a whole other sponsorship.
They have turned on us that quick that I thought they were on our side, but now we're fighting against them.
No, they are on our side. They are on our side.
Okay, well, good, because in my bookie, when Jackie Fargo was your bookie, he would always make sure to let you know that he was on your side.
How many wrestlers that you know of actually did take bets from other wrestlers, and which wrestlers had the worst gambling problems that you know of?
Well, good heavens. Now, don't...
other than Buck Robles.
Get me to out people for... Buck did spend a lot of time hanging around the racetrack, didn't he?
They were even making jokes about it on Mid-South TV in 82, yeah.
But Flair used to like to bet on things, but it wasn't like he was, like he read the racing form. He just, he would bet on the teams he liked. And as a matter of fact, the most money that I ever won on a bet, $50, was betting on Louisville against North Carolina in 86 with Ric Flair.
Was there someone at Crockett Promotions who did a Final Four pool amongst the wrestlers? An NCAA tournament pool?
Oh, no, unless the guys just bet amongst themselves because they liked it. There wasn't anything organized.
Dusty didn't have brackets that he was handing out on.
No, yeah, Dusty had brackets for the fucking Crockett Cup. Dusty wasn't going to do any extra paperwork in those days that he didn't have to do. But some guys, I don't know if anybody had a horribly desperate gambling problem. Although Fargo, that's where he retired. When he lived in China Grove, North Carolina, and he referred to it as my place of business. In that drawl that he had, my place of business. He would never say what it was, but it was my place of business. He had some kind of backroom, unlicensed betting operation that apparently did better than he did in wrestling. When we'd bring him over here to garden shows for OVW, he couldn't leave town for very long in certain periods of time, which was the playoffs of whatever the fuck, because it cost him more money to be away than it did that he'd make going to do a wrestling show.
Did he use Roughhouse as his muscle?
No,
when he had to collect, and this man hasn't paid me. Send Roughhouse.
No, I don't think Jackie ever had any trouble collecting. So probably didn't send Roughhouse. Oh, that was in like a 1973 issue of Wrestling Guide. That was what kind of one of the first things that exposed the business to me was when there was a picture of Roughhouse Fargo as Sonny Fargo refereeing in the Carolinas for Crockett. And the caption was kind of a wink. It says, referee Sonny Fargo cautions so-and-so about using roughhouse tactics in quotation marks. And I'm like, it was worse than when I found out Santa Claus was not real, is when I found out that Roughhouse wasn't really crazy.
If Vince McMahon brought Fargo in, that's what he would have done. You're the bookie. And this is your muscle. Hoss Fargo.
Well, Hoss, what are you doing this week on your various programming?
Oh, a big week on the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. This week on Breaking Kayfabe with Baldwin and Barry at BaldwinPod.com, or available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcast. The boys are breaking kayfabe on Blood. They're talking Hardway versus Blading with the Tennessee stud Ron Fuller, as well as looking at the famous Great Muta Hase match, the match that created the Muta scale. Listen to that today. Once again, BaldwinPod.com, or available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcast. Also want to make mention of John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight. Then and now, this week, we are reviewing July 9th, 1989. John just got back from Boston, where he saw the NWA and he interviewed Terry Funk. This is a great interview. You got to hear this. As well as Paul E. Dangerously from Scarsdale, his mansion in Scarsdale, otherwise known as his parents' house, calls into the show And this is a really, really fun conversation. All of that, plus Mitch Seinfeld on the show to talk about just being ambushed on the Morton Downey Jr. show by Captain Lou Albano and Davey O'Hannon. All of that and so much more. You got to hear it at pwspod.com or search for John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight then and now, wherever it is that you find your favorite podcast. And by the way, Jim, an interesting tidbit came out of that conversation about that Boston show. So John goes up to Boston to do some interviews for Pro Wrestling Spotlight, hangs out with Eddie, hangs out with Missy, hangs out with Paul. He's at the show. Gary Juster comes over to him and says, "We don't have a timekeeper." So John Arezzi ends up at ringside in the Boston Garden, being the timekeeper, playing everyone's music, and of course getting chased around by Terry Funk and other people. And that's where I got an interesting little tidbit. It was John Arezzi who got rattled and shaken out of his chair by Dr. Death, and it was that chair used to beat Jimmy Garvin in this famous incident you've talked about so many times where the Freebirds, and specifically Jimmy Garvin, got a little muscled up and thought he was going to show the Midnight Express at Dr. Death, who was really boss. How about that for a little fact you didn't remember?
That was poor old John Arezzi's fat ass in that chair.
Well, it was his chair. That's the way I would put it.
Well, that's that. You know what? Has he been following me at every incident, every controversial situation in my life? He got Vince Russo in the wrestling business. He was there in the chair that Dr. Death used to bash Jimmy Garvin's brains in with. Has he been following me like some kind of fucking wrestling Forrest Gump?
We will answer that question and much more on John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight, once again, wherever you find your favorite podcast. And of course, the 605 Super Podcast, the mothership.
I forgot. I fucking I muted you. I tried to mute you and muted myself.
All right.
I'll go back to mute.
Would you like me to yell it again? Give you a second shot?
No, that's all right.
Episode 100, truly, sincerely, in the works, will be out very, very soon. We are just finishing up a few more things. There were a few things that had to be redone. It should be coming at you pretty soon. It is a fucking masterpiece.
That's what Tom Schultz of Boston said every year to the record company.
What did I just read about? The band Boston, their drummer, it's his daughter that married The Rock?
What?
The drummer from Boston, his daughter is The Rock's wife, his new wife.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So now you know who to call for tickets.
Well, wait a minute. Now, I think it'd be I'd call the drummer for Boston to get tickets to The Rock's movies rather than call The Rock to get tickets to Boston these days.
Well, maybe. I don't know if they're playing around Louisville anyway. But once again, hear more from the 605 Super Podcast. Hey, there may be a Star Wars coming up. 605pod.com are available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcast. And thank you. I don't know how, but we just had a kind of a record-smashing month for people going through the archives. We really do appreciate it. Thank you for checking out the Super Podcast, the best wrestling podcast on the planet.
Well, now, wait a minute. Well, we don't consider this a wrestling podcast.
This is an experience.
This is an experience. All right, well, speaking of experience, we're going to experience some wrestling.
The culture of Cornette.
Thank you very much. Because, lay your hands on the radio. Because I have been so verklempt over the past several days with shipping and fulfilling orders and packing boxes and etc., I thought we would talk today about something that would calm me down a little bit. The most fondly remembered, at least in my mind, Great American Bash Tour. It wasn't the longest and hardest, but it was the first live on tour, and I can't believe we just recently figured out that we have done a deep dive, say that 3 times fast, on every year's bash except 1986. And I don't know how that happened, except we got off kilter and we just decided to continue it that way. I have no other explanation.
And you came in right after the 85 bash, correct?
Yes, because actually, when the Great American Bash 85 was going on in Charlotte at Memorial Stadium, the Midnight Express and I were in Columbus, fucking Georgia that night on the B show. Because we had Crockett had just absorbed the Atlanta office when he got the TBS television that spring. And there were still guys based in Atlanta, and there was still booking being done out of Atlanta and a whole Atlanta crew for the remnants of what the Georgia loop used to be, the local towns, and then the West Virginia and Ohio and Michigan northern tours. And to specifically keep the Midnight Express away from the Rock and Roll Express for 6 months, since Dusty had brought the Rock and Roll into Charlotte and put the World Tag title on them their first night in on television when they beat the Russians, Ivan Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev. They brought the Midnight in and put us in Atlanta, so we would be with a different, technically, even though everybody was same on television on the the TBS program, we would be with a different crew, and they could keep us in the Rock and Roll apart because they wanted to push us as the stars of the star heels of the Georgia crew, and the Rock and Roll as the star baby faces of the Charlotte crew. And then probably at the first of the following year, we would combine everything, right? Well, the first of the following year came about fucking 60 days after we moved to Atlanta and got apartments. All of a sudden, they started booking us more into Carolinas towns. And it was like, Cornette, you need to be in Charlotte for interviews on Wednesday. I was in fucking, like, one night I was in Chattanooga, Tennessee on, I was in Atlanta because I'd come back from somewhere. Anyway, I had to drive 300 miles through the mountains overnight to get to Charlotte to do promos for a territory we technically weren't even working yet. So anyway, we ended up moving to Charlotte a couple months later. But
who grumbled the most about being in that Georgia crew and not being on those Charlotte shows? You guys knew where you were going, but who there was a little pissed off about being on those shows, if anyone?
Well, everybody, because especially Buzz Sawyer, because everybody that had been in the Georgia crew knew that they probably were either going to get moved to Charlotte and be used as job guys, or knew that their time was fucking running out quickly. And Buzz knew that he was one of the guys that his time was running out quickly. So that's why he was a pill to work with, as they say, for a couple months with him, the Midnight Express against him and his brother Brett was fine. He was good. And that's where I got sideways with Slater that time. Because we had first come in and Dusty had the meeting with us. He said, we're going to put you guys over everybody everywhere. They even had the midnight Bobby and Dennis winning battle royals on spot shows and splitting the money. It was just, that's what Dusty had decreed, right? So we're in, well, I got my book here in front of me, but it's not important enough to put the exact town, but we're on the Northern tour. Dick Slater is still the Georgia booker. And he knew that he wasn't going to have that position very long also, I believe. So we're working with Slater and Buzz in the main event in, let's say, Cleveland. And he puts us a 30-minute Broadway through. So, of course, we get back to the locker room, and we're in the heels locker room, and Bobby and Dennis go, okay, he's fucking around here, because we knew that we were supposed to go over everywhere. And yes, kids, back then, this was an important thing. Dusty was pushing the new heel team. But the booker, whose job was tenuous, didn't want to put us over in one of the bigger towns. So the next morning, the boys had me call the office and talk to, goddamn, as a matter of fact, Dusty was on the road, so I talked to Jimmy Crockett and relayed the message. Just want to let you guys know, Dusty told us we were supposed to go over. Last night we went Broadway with Slater and Buzz, and we just want to make sure that everybody was on the same page. That's all I'm saying, right? So we get to Columbus, Ohio that night, and I've already gone to the fucking concession stand and got a couple of hot dogs, and I'm sitting down to eat them, and Slater comes in, and he's, Cornette, can I see you a minute? I'm like, can I finish my hot dogs? It was like my last meal. And he takes me in a room. He said, well, you talked to the office today? I said, Dick, we were told by Dusty Rhodes that this was supposed to be the case. We wanted to make sure we weren't getting any heat on ourselves by not reporting something when it wasn't the case. He said, well, they just didn't tell me what they were coming back with the next show up here. That's because they were fixing to cancel all the fucking shows up there to begin with anyway, right? Yeah. So I didn't know what to do, so I just figured we'd do a Broadway, which was his way of saying that's technically a reason a booker might give, but in this case it's full of shit. But, I said, well, I just, just want to make sure that nobody was upset at us, Dick. No, there's no heat on you. Okay, see ya. Good day. Thank you.
And then Slater and Sawyer, right after that, go to Mid-South, and that's when Slater starts booking there, right?
I believe so, yes. And because they both knew, for whatever reason, I don't know whether it was with Crockett or with Dusty, but both of them knew that they were not going to be around very much longer since Crockett and Dusty were in charge. But anyway, having said that, that was 1985, and we're going to talk about 1986. But it's kind of timely because they just put the Superstars on the Superstation special up on the WWE Network, which was from February of 1986 and kind of starts setting everything up, if you look at it, for what Dusty wanted to do that year, which was Crockett's record year in business. I know by his own deposition in a lawsuit. So if he was going to lie, he would have dumbed it down instead of exaggerated it. Jim Crockett Promotions grossed $21 million on just wrestling. And that's pretty much house show tickets and the occasional fucking closed circuit buy in 1986 alone, which in today's money, as they say, is somewhere around 50-something million, which would make a pretty healthy wrestling promotion today, wouldn't you think? Okay. But 86 was a record year for a number of reasons. Dusty finally had the team that he wanted in place. Starrcade 85 had been successful and had led to, obviously the Great American Bash in 85 that they just did in Charlotte had already got Dusty thinking, okay, we can do this. And then Starrcade, really impressed on him at 85, the idea that not only is business trending up, but, we can get away with some things here and we can do more big shows. So just real briefly, I got the results from the February 2nd. It was February. We've talked about February 2nd, 1986 on a show. We did a deep dive on it because that was the day that just a typical day in February that drew, what did we come up with? 65 or 70,000 people to wrestling matches live all over the country just in that one day. Yeah. And Crockett was in charge of or affiliated with 3 shows on that day that drew 30,000 people. They did the Moscomania show in Hamilton, Ontario with Flair and Dusty and the Road Warriors that afternoon that did 10 or 12,000 people. Charlotte that afternoon, the Rock and Roll and Midnight in the main event for the title did 12,000 people and a sellout $100,000. First wrestling sellout for Charlotte since 1978. And then we went to the Omni that night and taped the Superstars on the Superstation special in front of 7,000 people that paid about $70,000 in the Omni. So, like I said, Crockett drew 30,000 people that fucking day. And the special was taped that night and then aired the following Friday. And the reason why it was special is because it was the first primetime weekday night wrestling event on TBS in all of its years and all of its history with wrestling. They had done the Saturday night shows, the Sunday night shows. They'd never been in primetime on a weeknight. And the ratings were so good at this point that's when Turner had suggested, hey, we can do a special. They didn't trust going live yet, which was probably for the better at that point. But they pulled out all the stops to try to make the NWA guys and the NWA brand competitive with Vince in their own way. Vince was known for celebrities. So there's, the interview with Shivani sitting down with Dusty Rhodes and Willie Nelson, because Willie liked Dusty and he'd do the thing. And Dusty, of course, loved Willie Nelson, but there's a star on the fucking program. And they did a lot of video pieces, as I recall, on Magnum, including riding to the Omni on his motorcycle like he's a badass, right? And they talked about the big show at the Superdome, the Crockett Cup. So on their primetime special, they're trying to let people know, hey, and the NWA is going to be a part of this big event, the Crockett Cup at the Superdome in New Orleans. That was a fucking pretty big deal at the time for a wrestling event.
There was another big moment from that show. Let me play that.
Whip him like a dog.
And on the wrestling side of things, They open up the show. Dusty wanted, that was when we're going to beat the Rock and Roll Express. Midnight beats the Rock and Roll for the World Tag Team title to really get the program kicked off. We had done the angle where we dropped Ricky throat first on the racket and he bled from the mouth about the same time as this. And that was going to air on syndication. And this is on TBS. He spent the past 6 months getting the Rock and Roll Express over the Russians and getting the Midnight Express over various combinations of Jimmy Valiant and Superstar Billy Graham, or Jimmy Valiant and Ronnie Garvin, or just, whatever. We had consistently won, except for the blow off at Starrcade, consistently won our matches, and we're next in line for the shot at the tag team title. So we do the match that night, which was our second. We were in the ring with the Rock and Roll Express twice that day for 20-minute fucking main event matches in 2 towns, 4 hours apart by interstate. And that's how they used to book it that way. We literally got out of the fucking Charlotte Coliseum at like 3:30 and drove straight to the Omni and got there 15 minutes before fucking bell time for the special.
Wow.
And, the sound bite is when I get jerked in the ring by Ricky Morton and he's got my fucking belt and he's about to get me, and there's David Crockett, whip him like a dog.
He's into it just like the fans. I mean, he's screaming like a fan on commentary.
Because I think he seriously wanted to see me get whipped like a dog. I don't know if David had yet figured out how to take me, but
Whip him like a dog.
What was going on around the Crockett residence? They're whipping
oh
dogs.
My God. You should treat dogs better than that. And their little Harley says yes. But anyway, and that was also another famous quote, because there was that match. So the Midnight beats the Rock and Roll, and that set up our program with the Rock and Roll Express through spring and summer of '86. Most of the gate records and or attendance records that the Midnight set with the Rock and Roll happened during that time when it was hottest at first there. And he had that. But since we were the World Tag Team Champions, obviously the Road Warriors were always in contention. So he automatically, and then we'd start doing angles with the Road Warriors. And then he was brilliant the way he did it, because he had a lot of people involved with a lot of people. Even though they had a primary program, they had reasons to be mad at other people. And he shot the deal between me and Baby Doll to get Dusty and Magnum themselves, America's team, into it. So all that spring, we defended against all 3 of those teams, Road Warriors, Dusty and Magnum, Rock and Roll, plus a few others, and had some heat with all of those teams getting ready for the Bash. Then also on the special, the Road Warriors beat Ivan and Nikita Koloff. They were doing a feud over the 6-man title at that point, because Von Raschke was on the Road Warriors side from the AWA connection, and Khrushchev was on the Russian side. But they wanted to expose the Road Warriors and the Russians. And that's another reason why Flair worked with Garvin for the title on the show, and Dusty worked with Tully for the national title on the show, because Dusty wasn't crazy enough to give the hot match was Flair versus Dusty. And that's what was drawing and was going to continue to draw in the arenas. He wasn't going to give that away on free television. So he did the next best thing by Flair beats Garvin for the NWA World title. They have a great fucking match. And that's where David's other comment came in, when Garvin grabbed Flair by the fucking nose and starts twisting it like he's trying to take it off. And Flair's selling. David goes, "He's got him by the honker." And anyway, so they had a good match, but Flair got a win, and Dusty and Tully went to a 20-minute draw. So Dusty didn't fucking do a job, but at the same time, he didn't win the title. And then they did an angle with JJ and Tully and heating up the whole Horseman thing. So that Superstars on a Superstation special in February was really a precursor to what we would see all the blow-offs of that summer at the Bash. And they went through the Crockett Cup in April at the Superdome, which we've talked about that, which unfortunately didn't materialize gate-wise. Poor New Orleans at the time. But at least it's, it had a lot of talent together in the same place at the same time. But for example, just looking through the book here, we were in Charlotte on April the 12th at the Coliseum. It was another sellout of 12,000 people. That was the second sellout since February. We did that was the final sellout. We did 3 sellouts and one house of 7,000 people in 2 months. And that was the final sellout. And it was also shown on closed circuit in Spartanburg. I was in the cage above the ring for the Rock and Rollin' Midnight. And it was Flair and Tully against Wahoo and fucking, oh my gosh.
That was the 8th? You said that was April 8th?
That was April 12th.
April 12th.
Yeah. Anyway.
Where did you guys run on the 7th? Because that was WrestleMania 2. Did you guys run a big show in any of those towns, or what was on the schedule?
April 7th. April 7th, we were in Fayetteville and or Gaffney, South Carolina. We were in Gaffney, South Carolina, and the other crew was in Fayetteville.
Okay.
No, because at the time it would have been counterproductive to run against a big show in another town because there was no pay-per-view.
And there wasn't going to be much closed circuit for that show in the Carolinas.
Not in the Carolinas, no. So that would have been somewhat counter. It was only on television that got started, and then it bled over to the live events. Anyway, but the point I was going to make is that Charlotte did better than the New Orleans Superdome the week after. It was the state New Orleans was in. Anyway, so the idea for the Great American Bash in 1986 was that there would be 14 bash events. We would still be running a regular schedule as we always did, and TV tapings and etc. But 14 of these big events would be designated Great American Bash events, and they would be in major arenas and or stadiums all across the country. And we started getting fired up about this, right? And of course, we knew Flair talked to Jimmy Crockett all the time. And also Dusty was in everybody's, ear. Jimmy is and Flair is talking about how big this was going to be. So Flair is going around saying, guys, it's going to be like 14 Starcades. And we're like, holy fuck. And we knew we just made, even Starcade 85, we made $5,000, even though we were underneath. 14 Starcades, that's going to be $70,000. We'll take that, right? In 1 month. So the anticipation was there. And actually it was, and this was ahead of the WWF or anybody at that time, it was the most ambitious live event tour that any wrestling promotion ever undertook in terms of the size of the buildings, the coverage of the area of the different cities. It wasn't just in one territory. It was, all over the country, literally. Still in Crockett strongholds, but in a lot of the country. So that was the idea. And they spent most of the month of June, which was down at the gates, comparably, building up the idea of the bash. And July was going to be the fucking, be all end all in wrestling. So, and of course, Dusty loved country music. So George Jones played a few of them. Waylon Jennings played a couple. David Allan Coe was everywhere because David Allan Coe liked the boys too, I guess. And the whole country music thing was a thing I was not into. So, and apparently many of the fans weren't either.
Delbert Mcclinton.
Delbert Mcclinton played in Philly.
In Philly?
I don't know why. Yes.
That's an interesting place to put him.
I don't know why. And I'm sitting there going, they probably, if they made this deal 6 months ago, they could have got the fucking Hooters. And they were from Philly and they were the hottest band in the country at that particular point, right?
I'll take Delbert over the Hooters.
Well, anyway, the fans didn't really take to either. I mean, some places, especially in Charlotte and some place in the Carolinas, they did like it, but it had gotten away. And then George Jones, they had to throw him in the shower in Cincinnati because he was drunk and they had to sober him up. And I always forget who they either pulled the plug on Waylon Jennings or George Jones. I think it was Waylon Jennings in Jacksonville at the Gator Bowl because it was going to fucking rainstorm and they wanted to get the main event in the ring. If they got the first couple of matches in and then the main event, they didn't have to give the money back. And they had to pull the plug on him because he wouldn't fucking get off the goddamn stage so they could hurry up and ring the bell. Anyway, so it was promoted on the NWA TV or TBS TVs and the local syndication. We did promos for it, et cetera, et cetera. And right off the bat, the first bash is July 1st in Philadelphia at Veterans Stadium. And Philly was hot. And every month when we went up there, we were doing big houses at the Civic Center. And so we figured this one's going to be, and we had a rain date the next day. It's the only one they did this for. If it rained, they had the stadium on hold for the next day. So we get there, and Flair and I went out as the second or third match was going on. By then, everybody or most people were in their fucking seats, right? And we knew that the floor tickets, and there weren't a ton of them because you can't put ringside at a fucking baseball stadium, 20 miles back, you can't see. So it was a ringside setup and then a giant stadium. And what's Veterans Stadium seat? Fucking 75,000 or whatever. So we knew it wasn't going to be full, right? But Flair has been to Puerto Rico. He's seen big crowds all over the place. He's seen outdoor crowds. The previous year in Charlotte, the Great American Bash that led to all this was 27,000 people in Memorial Stadium in Charlotte for Flair and Nikita. So I thought that the crowd could not have possibly fit indoors at the Civic Center, which I think topped out at 11,000 something, so almost 12,000. Flair thought it was 15 to 17,000 people. That's what he figured. So we asked the house later on at the end of the night, what's the house? It was Elliot Murnick. And I'll never forget, everybody was like, oh, waiting to hear this, $215,000. And a lot of the air went out of the fucking locker room at that point, and that didn't fully get reflated again because oh man, they got the fucking expenses for the tour off. Everything else, for good or bad, the good houses, when they'd report it for the rest of the summer, they looked right. The bad ones, they looked right. But this way didn't look right. And it wasn't just Flair's wishful thinking, because I was figuring there's no way it'd go inside, and I was trying to look at it with a critical eye. And with the ticket prices, we figured at the number of people that we figured would be there, it would still be $300,000. So anyway, it's been the subject for debate for years. And a lot of that debate has been because of the Midnight Express book. I'm the only person that reported publicly the gate figure, which then extrapolating that by the ticket prices means that there was, basically around 10,000 people there, which is ludicrous because it didn't fill up the 75,000 seat stadium, but it sure, as I said, would have filled up the indoor Civic Center and more. There's no way those people could have got indoors. And I don't think Flair would have been 5,000 people off on a figure in a house that he'd seen a lot of similar size houses. So nevertheless, but now here, this is the kind of card that Dusty gave him to start this thing off. And the theme of the Great American Bash that year also was that Flair was going to defend against a different challenger in all the events. Of course, it didn't work out that way. There was a couple that duplicated, but for the most part, they halfway shot with it, as we'll talk about. But everybody had an issue with everybody, so you could plug these matches in. The Barbarian defeated Denny Brown. Mid-Atlantic champion Black Bart defeated Todd Champion. Remember old Todd Champion? Raging Bull Manny Fernandez beat Shaska Watley in a bunkhouse match. Now we start with the stipulations. Wahoo Mcdaniel beat Jimmy Garvin in an Indian death match. And this, the story behind this, what was the commissioner's name? Benz.
J.J. Benz.
J.J. Benz. He looked like the guy that either ran a funeral home or owned an old house in a horror movie. And he was the athletic commissioner in Pennsylvania. And there was so much. Wahoo bled, obviously, an Indian death match. I think Garvin bled. But Wahoo, what happened? The piece of the blade broke off in his fucking head. And when he got to the back, he went in the bathroom and squeezed his fucking head. And the piece of blade popped out and hit the mirror. And fucking the commissioner was freaking out about all the blood on the show. There'd already been 2 or 3. I think probably Bull bled, probably. Anyway, So he was going to shut the fucking show down in Philadelphia, right, of all places. And of course, then the boys then thought, well, the fucking WWF's paid him off to fuck us up here. Because this guy, you never really saw him at the wrestling shows. Apparently he came and brought his kids or whatever the fuck, and he was appalled. And normally there was a different inspector or whatever, but I guess because this was a big deal at Veterans Stadium. But he's one, and he used his athletic commissionership up there to get into a couple of the Rocky movies, I think. And he played where he played an athletic commissioner or some bullshit or a gangster or something. He looked like either one. But anyway, Wahoo and Garvin blood, and then Ronnie Garvin beat Tully Blanchard in a tape fist match. Jimmy Valiant beat Baron von Raschke in a coal miners match of some description. It was a pole match. And then the 6-man tag with me and the Midnight against Rock and Roll and Baby Doll, where obviously Baby Doll beats me. They had the best of 7 series between Magnum and Nikita for the U.S. title. And that was the first night. Nikita went up 1-0. And then Ric Flair defended against Road Warrior Hawk, the NWA title, and beat him by disqualification in one of those fucking deals where he's, has to defend against a different babyface. They didn't say babyface on every event. And they figured they'd like the Road Warrior Hawk getting the NWA title shot in Philly. Then go ahead.
Was anyone asking for the Road Warrior Animal title shot?
I can't remember. We're going to go through this because I can't remember. I've got my Midnight Express book. I've got a record book of the entire Crockett promotions during that time. I've got my actual road manual book. So I'm looking through all this stuff for the first time in a long time. But the main event was Dusty Rhodes and Animal against Ole and Arn Anderson in a cage match. So that was a lot of basically title matches, stipulation matches, violent matches. It was a hot-shotted card. He built everything to do these blow-offs and these grudge matches where everybody had an issue with each other, and he could vary up the card somewhat and still make it mean something. So that was the night also that Hawk got into the friendly shoot with Ronnie Garvin in the locker room. I don't know. I wasn't in on the first of the conversation, but they were talking obviously about wrestling. And it led to one of those deals. Me and a bunch of other people started noticing it when they got down in the fucking floor. But they got down in a wrestler's starting position, right, for an amateur wrestling match. Like one guy on his hands and knees and the other guy around, and started wrestling. And Hawk was a badass, strong as a bull, bouncer, street fighter, bar fighter. He could not wrestle. And Ronnie Garvin was a tough motherfucker, was not the size of Hawk, but he could wrestle really good. And he'd been in business 20 years, and a lot of guys had shown him shit. So he kept coming out from under or going down on top of and riding, and just not stretching Hawk, but he was riding him real bad. And Hawk couldn't get out from under him. And then finally fucking Ronnie let him up, or they agreed to call time on it or whatever. And then Hawk said, give me one more chance. And they did the same thing from a different position. And Ronnie's riding him, and poor Hawk is blowed up and goddamn just sucking wind. And then the fucking bell rang, and he had to go out and work with Flair. But that was an illustration. Don't always judge a book by its cover, because it depends on the rules in which you're competing as to who's the toughest of who. Anyway, so they gave us a rain date the next day, which we didn't use because it didn't rain. So we were in Philly, and as I recall, Dennis Corluzzo and Frank Chili and I went somewhere. But then we had to go on July 3rd to Washington, D.C. at the Rfk Stadium, because that was another bash event. And of course, Flair and the Horsemen had already said, well, we're going to rent limousines to take because we're flying up to Philly. We're there for a couple of days. They were going to Washington. And of course, the Horsemen are going to get the limousine, and they had a limo with goddamn fucking driver with the suit on and everything. He looked like one of those organ grinders monkeys, had all the fucking gold braid and everything on his jacket. Well, the Midnight Express and I, not to be outdone, along with, I believe, the Barbarian. Yes, Barbarian definitely was with us. And I don't know whether Tommy Young was with us or not also, but we get a limousine. Of course, we get a limousine from a guy that Dennis Corluzzo said, hey, I know a guy with a limo. And this guy shows up, and that's exactly what it is. It's a guy with a limo. He has no key. He's got like a fucking jacket, but he don't have the whole outfit on. He looks like he might have been a fucking mailman. I'm not sure. And he's a guy with a limousine. I don't even think he had a business card. He didn't have a real company. He just drove people around in a limo. He said, I'll drive you down to Washington. Yeah, sure. We'll have face from South Jersey. You would figure, because Dennis knows him, right? So I remember plain as day. We go down the night before to Washington so that we can fucking be there the next day and go and blah, blah, blah. So he drives us down. And we're after dark. By the time we got through all the Northeast traffic and everything, we're after dark getting into Washington. And this was before GPS or anything like that. And honestly, it was the first time that me or anybody in the Midnight Express had ever rented a limousine. So therefore, we thought the driver was supposed to know where to go. Well, he told us he did, kind of. But we end up driving through the streets of Washington, D.C., after dark in this fucking limousine. And it was compounded by the fact that I didn't know at the time, because remember, we're Southern boys. It's our first sojourns up to the Northeast. I didn't know that you shouldn't stay at a hotel near the RFK Stadium, even if it had a famous name in its title.
Why's that, Jim?
Well, because it's probably going to have a shady cast of characters operating it. It's going to have an even shadier cast of characters staying in it. It's not going to have been renovated since the fucking Hoover administration. There are going to be bars on the windows, and if they put you up at a high enough floor, maybe you won't hear the incessant sirens and fucking traffic and horns honking all fucking night. But you might anyway if you have to open the window because they don't have air conditioning that works right. So we found that. But anyway, we're driving down the streets after dark of Washington, D.C., right? And the guy, our limo driver, pulls over and asks somebody that he thought looked like they should know where the fuck we're supposed to go. And he's telling me, like, yo, I'm from South Jersey. I don't know where we're going. So while we're stopped on the side of the street, there's a lady of the evening. I don't want to appear sexist. Is hooker? Well, hooker, Luthez was a hooker, just a different kind. But a hooker is walking down the side of the road. And, of course, Barbarian has to roll down the window and say, ooh. But all she hears is the ooh because they're the tinted windows, and he's sitting over it. So she immediately sees a limousine, and she runs over, and a smile on her face was a mile wide, grinning from ear to ear. She's got a woo out of a limousine. She don't know until she sticks her head in there and sees me and Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey and Tommy Young and the Barbarian, who's got the most welcoming expression on his face, and that grin automatically, she turned that fucking upside down frown right back upside down, and it was a frown, and she's like, whoa now. And we're like, no, we're just stopping to ask for directions. I think even she would have drawn the line there. But anyway, so we found the hotel, got to the hotel. Next day we get to the building. RFK Stadium, Washington, D.C. It was a record house for Washington, D.C. at $135,000, but because of those high ticket prices, it was probably only about fucking 7,000 or 8,000 people. We would run the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland, the following year and the following year after that, and do bigger houses indoors there than we did because this is in the fucking hood, boy, or at least it was back then. So that was one of those deals that we should have had an indoor building instead of going to a stadium. But same kind of matches. The Road Warriors and Magnum beat the Russians, Ivan and Nikita and Darso, Khrushchev. Flair beat Dusty. Baby Doll beat me. The Rock and Roll beat the Midnight Express. Tully beat Ron Garvin. Bull and Valiant beat the Barbarian and Shaska. Wahoo beat Arn Anderson in a strap match, and a few other preliminaries. Then The next day, we go all the way to Memphis, Tennessee at the Liberty Bowl. Brian, are you aware of what 2 piss holes in a snowbank look like?
I am not, no.
Well, that's what the crowd looked like in the Liberty Bowl. It was the lowest drawing bash event, I think, ever of any year, possibly. There couldn't have been 1,000 people there in an 80,000 seat stadium. We're next to the Mid-South Coliseum at the Liberty Bowl. This was not promoted in conjunction with Jerry Lawler and Jerry Jarrett. And it died. I have one, this reference book says there was 1,900 people there. I'll eat your fucking hat. They didn't even tell us what the house was. And this was with Dusty, Magnum, and Baby Doll against Me in the Midnight in a cage match. Road Warriors against the Russians. Tully and Garvin. Rock and Roll against the Andersons. There wasn't any Jerry Lawler, and they didn't want to hear from it. So, but we go from the sublime to the ridiculous. The next day, July 5th, is Charlotte, North Carolina at Memorial Stadium. And we did over 20,000 people and $234,000, which $234,000 in today's money, as they say, is somewhere a little north of $500,000, which ain't a bad fucking house. And those people were into it. That was Denny Brown Drew with Steve Regal, the NWA Junior Heavyweight title. Robert Gibson beat Black Bart. Ole and Arn Anderson beat Sam Houston and Nelson Royal. Manny Fernandez beat Baron von Raschke in a bunkhouse match. Wahoo Mcdaniel beat Jimmy Garvin in the Indian strap match. Ronnie Garvin beat Tully in a taped fist match. The Road Warriors beat Ivan and Nikita in a double Russian chain match. Jimmy Valiant beat Shaska Watley, which was the famous incident where basically they shaved Pez's head, and he became the bald-headed geek for Handsome's promos. Dusty, Magnum, and Baby Doll beat Me in the Midnight in a cage match. And this was where they shot the angle because Big Bubba had just come in May. And so after the match, Baby Doll knocks me out with a right and beats me, right? But then Big Bubba wants to get in there and fucking kick Dusty's ass, and Dusty comes outside to face Big Bubba. And then we all slam the door and trap Magnum inside, and Baby Doll for what she was worth at that point, physically. And then we all jump fucking Dusty, and then Bobby holds Dusty, and Dusty's down on his knees. And Bobby's holding him in a surfboard from behind, like with his wrists. And Dusty liked to sell like that, where especially if he was bleeding, he could lean up and everybody could see his face and the pain on his face. And Bubba is punching him in the fucking head. And every time he punched, it sounded just like this. Bubba's fist on his forehead. And every time you'd hear Dusty go, oh, 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 oh. Because Bubba only had 12 matches and he wanted to make it look good. And I swear I saw the fucking knots visibly rising on poor goddamn Dusty's head. So anyway, that set up the animosity between Dusty and Bubba even more. There's the TV in Spartanburg where he cracked him over the head with the chair that Klondike Bill forgot to gimmick, all those other things which led up to Dusty having a future program with Bubba. And then by the following February, Dusty and Bubba in the finals of the Bunkhouse Stampede sold out Pittsburgh. 16,600 people is still the most people they ever had to see wrestling in that building. $166,000 for the house. And Bubba had been in the business a grand total of 9 months. So Dusty had a way of, he made guys make impacts when you first saw him in a big deal, and so they'd be memorable, and then he had a place he wanted to go with it. Anyway, and then the main event of the Bash in Charlotte, Ric Flair beat Ricky Morton in the cage with his feet on the ropes. And that's the night that Flair came in the Channel 9 helicopter with the Channel 9 newscaster in with him and landed on the field in the stadium. And it was fucking cool. But the Rock and Roll were so hot in Charlotte, especially after that string of sellouts, that there was no choice. They wanted to have Ricky Morton be the challenger in Charlotte. And it worked. They did, once again, 23,000 people or whatever. $234,000 in Charlotte, North Carolina. So, and then the next night, July 6th, we were in Raleigh 180 miles up the road. This was not a bash event. This was just a regular house show, and we also shot television there that night. But it sold out the Dorton Arena, did $74,000, which was a Raleigh record. And that's where that famous Midnight Express footage against the Road Warriors is, where you see the people in front of the windows in that unique Dorton Arena.
Yeah.
It was sold out. You can see a head in every bit of the top row because they're in front of a window. And they gave them still a big card there that night. And at the same time, there was also a matinee show that they had done in Asheville that day. So these the Carolina shows were cooking. They were hot as they could be. The next night, July 7th, we were in Greenville, South Carolina for just a regular house show. The Midnight Express was off that night, but I had a match with Baby Doll, and they did a $43,000 house, which was a Greenville record for that event, and that record wouldn't last 2 more weeks. In July the 8th was Spartanburg, South Carolina. We taped 2 more television syndicated TV tapings that night, and Spartanburg sold out with an $11,000 house. Then July 9th was the next bash event at the Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati, and this was a giant disappointment. Cincinnati didn't buy into George Jones. It rained all day. It killed any walk up, and they did 3,500 people and about $78,000 at the house. And once again, that was Cincinnati had done sellouts just earlier that year inside at the Cincinnati Gardens. As a matter of fact, that famous night in March, we sold out Cincinnati Gardens, 12,000 people and $100,000. And the WWF ran with Hogan and I think Savage at Riverfront Stadium and did another 7,000 people, probably close to another 100%. 20,000 people went to wrestling in Cincinnati in one day. But with this weather, even with the bash card and the whole 9 yards and just the stadium, it didn't click, and they did 3,500. Anyway, July 10th, Charleston, West Virginia. Here's something topical at the Civic Center, the Great American Bash. And somebody was talking about, since All Elite is having one of their tapings upcoming, that Charleston never sold out for wrestling, right?
Yeah, that was a question I was sent in the drive-thru.
It was on the drive-thru. Right?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know where they got it, because this was, I have down that not only was this a record gate for Charleston, this set an all-time gate record for the state of West Virginia, $113,500 for the bash on July 10th, 1986. And it was Ole and Arn Anderson beat Don Kernodle and the Italian Stallion. Stallion rears his giant head. Valiant and Manny he had the world's largest head. That's what we used to say. You couldn't headlock him because you couldn't reach. Stal had a giant head. Valiant and the Bull beat the Barbarian and Pez Whatley. Ronnie Garvin over Tully Blanchard. Robert Gibson over Dennis Condrey in a bunkhouse match. Magnum TA and Baby Doll against me and Bobby. They beat me and Bobby. Wahoo McDaniel defeated Jimmy Garvin. Dusty Rhodes and the Road Warriors defeated Khrushchev, Ivan, and Nikita Koloff in a steel cage match. And Ric Flair beat Ricky Morton for the NWA World title. And that set the all-time gate record for the state of West Virginia, 113.5, which would be somewhere around 250 today. Then the next day, the 11th, we're over in Roanoke, Virginia. This is 3 hours down the road. Same thing for a bash at the Civic Center. It was $72,000 house and a gate record for the city of Roanoke. Then July 12th was the infamous Gator Bowl in Jacksonville, Florida. And by cracky, that was, it was okay. It was $113,000, which was a gate record for Jacksonville again. But if they'd have gone indoors and just charged higher prices than normal, I think they would have had more people, because they only had about 10,000 people. And part of it was threatening rain and etc., which that's why I've always hated outdoor shows. Then July 13th, we went to San Antonio, Texas. Jacksonville, Florida to San Antonio, Texas, right? Which is a haul. And it wasn't a bash event, just an event at the Hemisphere Arena. Can you care to guess? I've been quoting these other figures. Care to guess what San Antonio did? Major city in Texas, like San Antonio.
Attendance?
Yes.
2,500.
People? You would be wrong.
Oh.
Not that many.
Wow.
The house was $23,600. I don't know why they decided to leave Florida and go to San Antonio, Texas. Otherwise, Dusty always had a soft spot for Texas. On a Sunday, and then the following day, Monday, we're at Wilmington, North Carolina. But it just San Antonio didn't fucking work. We had a World Tag Team title match with the Road Warriors, and our payoff was $325 a piece. $23,000 house. So anyway, that did not work. But then we come back to Wilmington, North Carolina, the Legion Stadium. That's where the plane was on the way when it crashed with Ric Flair and Johnny Valentine and those guys. Guess what Wilmington, North Carolina did instead of San Antonio, Texas on a Monday night?
Guess the attendance?
Yes.
13,000.
Dollars or people?
People.
Oh, fuck you. You've gone the other way too far. Wilmington, North Carolina sold out the outdoor stadium, did 5,000 fans, set a city gate record, $39,000.
And you want me to handle your bets?
Yeah, yeah, boy, I'm starting to rethink that now. But once again, Wilmington, North Carolina, not even a bash event, but it almost doubled the house of San Antonio, Texas. And the main event of that card was Dusty and Magnum against the Midnight Express. And it was as I said, not only a outdoor sellout, which those are rare, but also a record house. Then July 15th, we were in Gaffney, South Carolina for 2 TV tapes and a dark match of the Midnight Express versus Dusty Rhodes and Magnum TA. And that event, as I remember, Gaffney, we ran the local college gym. It sold out and set a city gate record of $17,800 2 days in advance. That's how hot business was in the Carolinas at that point. Even the spot shows were selling out and in advance. We did a day off on July 16th. Then July 17th, we were in Columbia, South Carolina to do a TBS TV taping. Midnight against Dusty Rhodes and Magnum TA for the NWA title was a dark match. And it sold out the Township Auditorium. It did $28,000 at TV taping prices.
Are you guys tired by this point? By the 16th?
Oh, fine. Sleep is for pussies. Why are you? Well, are you kidding? We'd had one day off, but now wait a minute. See, here's the thing. We worked June 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, and 30th. June 26th and 27th had been spot shows, 2 days or 2 tapes of Atlanta TV on the 28th, a double shot, Gainesville and Marietta, Georgia on the 29th, and Buckingham, Virginia on the 30th, and then we started the bash. So now we're at July 18th. We've had 1 day off. This was the bash in Richmond, Virginia, which set a gate record for any wrestling event in the state of Virginia. And that would last for a week. The Richmond Coliseum did $115,000. No, I'm serious. Richmond Coliseum did $115,000. The main event was Dusty, Magnum, and Baby Doll against the Midnight and myself in the steel cage. And Flair against Wahoo for the NWA title. And that was, I'm pretty sure, a sellout. I don't have it marked down as a sellout of the Richmond Coliseum. It may not have been a complete sellout, but ticket prices were higher. Anyway, then the next day, they didn't have a bash in Baltimore. It was just a regular card in Baltimore on the 19th, and I've never figured that out. Because why not have a bash there? But the regular card at the Baltimore, and remember how we sucked in Washington on July 3rd? Yeah. And did 130 grand, but only 4,000 people? This did, back indoors and back at regular ticket prices, 10,000 fans and $106,000. And the card in Baltimore, just so we know if there's any difference between a bash and non-bash, there really basically wasn't. Listen to this card in Baltimore. Ivan Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev beat Hector Guerrero and Manny Fernandez. Magnum TA beat Nikita Koloff. Steve Regal beat Rocky King. The Road Warriors beat the Midnight Express by DQ. Wahoo McDaniel beat Jimmy Garvin. Ron Garvin beat Tully Blanchard. And Dusty Rhodes and the Rock and Roll Express beat Ric Flair, Ole, and Arn Anderson in an elimination match. So there you have it. And that was a nice $1,000 payoff that night, which would be the equivalent of about $2,500 today for one night's work. So that wasn't bad.
Not bad for a guy making all this book money.
Well, it wasn't books. Wrestling wasn't books back in those days, but it was still profitable. So anyway, that was on July 18th. 19th, Baltimore. Then we go back to Greenville, South Carolina, where, as I mentioned, we had set the gate record there on the 7th, right? Well, on the 20th, it still wasn't a bash event, but they put an extra big card in, including the Rock and Roll Express against Ric Flair and Ole Anderson, and Magnum and Baby Doll against me and Bobby Eaton. I don't have the complete cards, but it sold out again and did $62,000. It broke the all-time gate record of $43,000 we set 2 weeks earlier because they jacked the prices up.
You're working all the time with Baby Doll. Are you guys communicating at all when you're not in the ring? Your relationship was not good behind the scenes, right?
Well, no, we did. No. I didn't know she was a Republican until much later. No, we weren't. We didn't have animosity between us, but there was starting to be a few potatoes being thrown. But most of them she was throwing and I was catching. But no, we really didn't have any communication because, once again, most of the locker rooms were separate.
Did she seem to have fresh potatoes usually the day after a TBS show aired with one of your promos?
No. Think about this. She had never wrestled before, actually worked. She had never been trained to work. She was a valet for 2 years at that point and had never really been put in matches. So the punches were there, or if she was late, she'd make up for it by that time in Raleigh on that sellout, steamrolling me and punching me full force at the base of the skull at a dead run, where I saw sparkly things and went down for a shoot, or dislocating my jaw in St. Louis in the cage with the slap that she's supposed to miss so that I can fall backwards and things like that. But no, we weren't mad at each other. And also we were making money, and this was the best run she probably ever had in her career. Because these were still going to be huge payoffs, even if it wasn't going to be 14 Starcades. And she got mad but she since admitted she was too tight on me. She tackled me, and when I went down face first, because she tackled me like fucking Dick Butkus for the Detroit Lions, she went down on top of me, and my elbow chipped her tooth. But she's since taken blame for that.
How did these gates compare to the last Stampede gates?
They were obviously, some of them were bigger because the ticket prices were even heavier, and in a lot of cases the buildings were bigger. The last Stampede gates were not only more profitable for us, but also more career making, because even though they were big cards, it was you knew the two matches at the top were drawing the money, and specifically Watts's money, Watts's match. And we were the foils for that. So we got paid better per capita for it because he knew we were responsible for most of the houses. On these, the money was spread out because you had Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes and the Road Warriors and Magnum TA and the Russians and the Midnight and the Rock and Roll, and you had megastars. So the money was spread out, so it was good, but it wasn't as good as it would have been if these were all houses drawn in Mid-South Wrestling and we were drawing them all. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I understand.
But anyway, so we go to Greenville, 62 grand sellout. The next day in Fayetteville, North Carolina, is a bash event. And they had advertised it as a bash event. That's July 21st. And this time it's Dusty, Magnum, and Baby Doll against us in a cage. And Robert Gibson, I remember this plain as day. This was where Robert Gibson got his NWA title match, because everybody got one, right? And it was a goddamn good match because Robert was so underappreciated. He could work his ass off. It's just that he spent all that time next to Ricky Morton, who could sell his ass off. But Fayetteville, for that show, even with I shouldn't say even with Robert on top, but the only time that Robert ever got a single main event for the NWA title, it did another sellout, another all-time City Gate record, $104,750. And the Cumberland County Memorial Arena was only supposed to hold 6,500 people. I have never seen more people crammed into a building like this. And I think they shot something for television because it was so hot in there. And it was so hot outside that the brick walls, the concrete block walls of the building were actually sweating. There was water running on the inside. There was water running down the fucking inside of the walls. I've never seen a fucking crowd like that in my life. And they loved everything. So then we go the next day, the 22nd, to Greenwood, South Carolina, and do another TV taping. Think how many times we've been in the Carolinas, either North and South Carolina or Virginia this month, and still doing these houses. And then we go the 23rd of July to Johnson City, Tennessee at Freedom Hall. And this was what convinced me that Johnson City had to be part of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. The main event there was Dusty Magnum Adal against me in the Midnight in the cage. And then let me try this again. Ric Flair against Ron Garvin for the NWA title. Another sellout, 6,000 plus. Freedom Hall, we know from running it, seated 6,500, and they put up extra floor seats. And an all-time city record, $101,000. And from what Bo James says, what we didn't know outside was that they turned a couple thousand people away that night. So Johnson City, Tennessee does $100,000. San Antonio, Texas does 23. And they wonder why Crockett should have stayed in the South. The next day, imagine that, July 24th, we were off and got to rest. And then July 25th, Norfolk, Virginia at the Scope, a Great American Bash date. Double main event, Rock and Roll and Baby Doll against Midnight and myself, and Flair and Dusty for the title. This is the event that broke the record that Richmond, Virginia set 2 weeks beforehand for the all-time state of Virginia gate record. This sold out the Scope at high ticket prices and did $157,000, which would be approximately $325-ish in today's money.
Hey, Jim, between Johnson City and Virginia, what did you do? Did you go home on your day off, or do you just head to the town? What do you do?
Oh, no, with Johnson City, you could get from Johnson City to Charlotte in 4 hours. So, yeah, we were back in Charlotte that night, had a day off, and then hold on, I don't have to recall. I got the book. I've got 3 books open in front of me, so it just remains to be seen which one I'm looking at. Hold on here. No, I know. That's why we didn't. You know what? We flew Crockett's plane to Norfolk because of the schedule we had to do. So we drove back from Johnson City, and we were off a day on the 24th, and then we flew to Norfolk because we had to do this weekend schedule. Listen to the final weekend of July. Friday, July 25th is Norfolk, Virginia. Saturday, July 26th is Greensboro, North Carolina. And Sunday, July 27th is Atlanta TV in the Techwood Studios at TBS in Atlanta in the morning. And then Dallas, Texas that night at 8 o'clock.
Oof, jeez.
So we flew to Norfolk. We had the sellout house. We did $157,000 for the Bash event. Then the next day we would have driven a rental car to Greensboro. No, we had Crockett's plane. Yeah, we had Crockett's plane. So we go to Greensboro and we do the Bash there, which ended up being even bigger than Charlotte. It was indoors at the Coliseum. It drew over 13,000 fans, but set the non-Starcade City gate record, $257,000. So just between Greensboro and Charlotte, those two towns in the same month They did almost $500,000 at the gate, which would be $1.2 million today in the same for towns that ran every month.
That's crazy when you think about how far Greensboro would fall within a few years.
Oh yeah. Well, once the TBS took over, everything. Yeah. But anyway, 80 miles from Charlotte, Greensboro does $250,000. Then Sunday morning, we go to Atlanta TV and we did one show instead of having to do a Saturday night show and a Sunday night show. The Sunday was preempted, so we did one Saturday night show and a little bit of a spot. I have down a 12-minute spot. I think we did some kind of special segment for something. And then flew to fucking Dallas. And that was the first Crockett event in Reunion Arena. It was still the home base of the Von Erichs and World Class Wrestling, but they were declining at that point at the gate. And I remember this plainly because the crowd for the Crockett show in Reunion Arena, they drew almost 10,000 fans. It was a $95,000 house. So it was much better than what the Von Erichs were doing at that period of time.
And Watts. That's a pretty remarkable crowd for Dallas.
And Watts.
That time. Yeah.
Well, but also, and unfortunately the card we've lost, except because of my book. We know that it was Dusty and Flair for the NWA title and the Rock and Roll and the Midnight for the tag title. And we went to a 20-minute Broadway with them. And I'm pretty sure that Dusty beat Flair on DQ. But anyway, the crowd in Reunion Arena was hotter than it was when we were there for the Von Erichs in '85. We had to struggle to get back to the locker room. People were taking swings at us. They were rowdy at ringside. It was a hot fucking situation because I even made note of it in my book. What the fuck? Well, seriously, yeah, because they were trying to, and we did a Broadway, a 20-minute draw, and they were still trying to get us on the way back. I'm thinking that they were looking for another wrestling product because that was still the period of time where the fans were there, but they were disappointed in the Von Erichs.
Well, speaking of looking for another wrestling product, did any of the world-class wrestlers show up?
I think that's the night that Buddy Roberts was there. I mean, anybody that was being featured at that time probably wouldn't out of, just because they knew that might be the end. But there was one time that Buddy Roberts came to visit at Reunion Arena, and that was around a time that a rumor had gone out that he was dead, that he had died or got killed or something. And we come in the locker room, and there's Buddy just dressed in old jeans and old shirt and bandanas and, probably rode a motorcycle there or whatever. And Dennis Condrey looked at him and said, "Buddy, I heard you were dead." He waited a beat and he said, "I see they was right." But anyway, that period of time they were upset at the Von Erichs, but they still wanted wrestling. And then within a couple of years, they just kind of get turned off to the whole wrestling thing. But they were hot that night. So then the next day, the 28th. Now, bear in mind, we've gone from Greensboro, South Carolina on Saturday night. We've done Atlanta TV on Sunday morning, gone to Dallas, Texas on Sunday night. Guess where we are on Monday?
Atlanta.
Back in Wilmington, North Carolina, where we came from fucking San Antonio 2 weeks ago, right? They ran Wilmington again after selling it out. We had a return match with Dusty and Magnum for the title off of things we did the previous week. And did another 16 grand. So about 2,000 people outdoors. And, once again, Wilmington and Greensboro are 90 miles apart, maybe. And we just done $250,000 2 nights beforehand. And anyway, you could go to a goddamn parking lot in the Carolinas and draw 1,000 people for wrestling at this period of time.
Hey, Jim, while we're talking about outdoor shows, and you mentioned how you don't like them traditionally, just because we just talked about it on the Studcast, did you ever do anything before Smoky Mountain at the amphitheater at Chilhowie Park?
No.
You never
well, in Smoky Mountain, it was closed during the period of time.
Before Smoky Mountain.
I'd never been there. And here's the thing. It worked in Knoxville because it got established in Knoxville. I've always disliked outdoor shows because the rain is problematic and weather. Also because sometimes the atmosphere is bad. The sound gets lost.
That's what I asked Ron about. And Ron said that's why Chilhowie Park was great because they built it into the mountain. So the sound would bounce off the mountains. He said it was great.
Here's the thing. If all the normal things that don't apply to outdoor shows, the sound getting lost, it being too big or whatever. The Chilhowie Park is an amphitheater that's built into the side, like instead of a hill. You know, that mountain is good. They have some mountains down there. This is not actually would not qualify as a mountain, but it's an amphitheater where imagine a kind of a bowl, half of a bowl, a series of concrete bleachers going up the side of the hill, way, way up, like the side of an arena. It was there, and then the guys would come out on the other side of the ring was a stage, and that's where you would come out. So everybody was looking in one direction and looking down on you from the sides and the front, and the sound wouldn't leave because it was kind of trapped there. And also, going back years to the Kazana promotions, they established that because back in those days, they weren't big enough to go to the Civic Coliseum except a few times a year if the world champion came in town or Ron Wright against Don Carson was real hot or whatever, right? So a lot of times they would go to the indoor building at Chilhowie Park, and the indoor building didn't have air conditioning. So from the late fall through early spring, they would have indoor matches at Chilhowie Park at their exhibition building. But as soon as the weather started getting perky, they would go outdoors because in the summertime, it was so fucking hot that it would hurt their crowds. It was so painfully, dangerously physically hot in that building. So they'd go outside wrestling under the stars. And in those days, the fans were so loyal and the programs were so hot. It's not exaggeration. You know, I used to think it was wrestlers' exaggeration. Les Thatcher told me a couple of stories till I saw the newspaper articles that actually backed it up. One night, they actually sold out Chilhowie Park, almost 5,000 people in a rainstorm to see Les Thatcher and Whitey Caldwell against, I think it was either Don and Al Green or the Alaskans. And they would have 3-match cards, but all the matches back in those days were 2 out of 3 falls.
Yeah.
And you went to see your main event, and the people stuck with it. And it happened more than once that in the rain, even the boys would think they were going to have to cancel, and the people wouldn't leave. So Knoxville had an outdoor tradition that, unlike a lot of other cities that never established it because of the problems that they were able to overcome. And plus, them East Tennesseans are just tougher. They don't mind sitting out in the rain because they wanted to see somebody put an East Tennessee dog whooping on somebody. Anyway, so we come back to Wilmington, North Carolina, July 29th, Rock Hill, South Carolina, right across the state line from Charlotte for 2 TV tapings. We loved to go to Rock Hill because it was a 15-mile trip. Then we were back in Raleigh on July 30th. For a regular event, which I don't even have the gate listed, but it was a Midnight Express against Wahoo, Mcdaniel, and Ronnie Garvin. And it wasn't the most famous one. The most famous one that we had with Wahoo and Garvin in Raleigh was a 1-hour Broadway, where we were the main event, and it was a B show. The stars were somewhere else, and the Midnight are defending against Wahoo and Ronnie Garvin. And it was colder weather, and it was raining because it was cold in that building. Because one thing that Dorton Arena did not have was a state-of-the-art thermostat. And it's fucking cold, and the people are wearing their jackets, and we've got a literally cold match in more ways than one, where we have no angle with Wahoo and Garvin. Otherwise, we have personal heat with them because I called them Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble on a fucking promo, and they took exception to that. So the chops were laid in for poor Bobby and Dennis extra. But we had to go an hour Broadway one night, and it was one of those deals where one of them had to chase me back in the back so I could take a piss and all that stuff. And it was the coldest match I've ever been in. That was a challenge there. This was not that time. July 31st, we were back in Columbia, South Carolina, where Dennis went to a 30-minute draw with Ronnie Garvin, and Magnum and Baby Doll beat me and Bobby. And then... guess where we went on August 1st, the day before the final Great American Bash, the day after, that's in Atlanta, Georgia, on August 2nd, the day after we were in Columbia, South Carolina, 150 miles away from Atlanta. Guess where we went on August 1st?
Oh, based on everything we've done so far, I want to say Texas, but I can't be Texas again.
You would be correct.
No way. Come on. Come on.
Guess where?
You did San Antonio. You did Dallas. Did you guys run in Houston against Bosch?
No, we didn't. We went back to San Antonio, baby.
That was the worst town.
We went, they had booked this more than 3 weeks out, right? I wrote an ill-advised return. They returned to the hemisphere in San Antonio 3 weeks later after drawing, what was it, $23,000?
Yeah, I think that's what you said, yeah. $325 payday for the Road Warriors, right?
Well, guess what they did this time?
They cut ticket prices?
$12,700.
Oh my God.
I'm going to give you this card, right? And you've heard what these other towns were drawing. Hold on. Oh God, I can't give you the card because I'm the only one apparently that reported on our match was the Rock and Rollin' Baby Doll against me in the Midnight, but they had, I think, yes, they taped some TV out there because yes, they had us against the Road Warriors also. They had, no, wait a minute. What the fuck is it? Anyway, I don't know what they fucking had. No, they didn't. This is in the wrong place. But anyway, the point is they ran San Antonio again. They thought the first time it was going to be so good. They had booked a return 3 weeks later. They went in with all the stars. I remember they took Crockett's plane, the whole 9 yards, and they did half the shitty house they did 3 weeks beforehand. And we had to go all the way from Columbia, South Carolina to fucking San Antonio, Texas, and then back to Atlanta. Now, we drove back from Columbia. We drove back Charlotte because it was 80 miles, right? So we were home Thursday night, and then we fly all the way to San Antonio for the show on Friday the 1st. And then, that's right, they took Crockett's plane, but there was too many stars, so I flew commercial, because now that I'm looking at my book,
but there are too many stars. So
there were too many stars on the card. Drew all that money. By the way, our payoff was $185,000 or $185. Yeah. $185 for that fucking 6-man with Baby Doll and rock and roll. But the next day I have to fly commercial from San Antonio back to Atlanta. It's the day of the Atlanta Bash, the final bash on tour. And I get stuck in the fucking San Antonio airport from 8 o'clock that morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And finally get to Atlanta just in time to get in a goddamn cab and go to the Fulton County Stadium, where they had to go outdoors in Atlanta, couldn't go to the Omni, even though they had trouble except for Starrcade filling the Omni to begin with. We go to Fulton County Stadium, so at least I can say that I've wrestled there. And it did $185,000, about 10,000 people, which would not have filled up it. They would have actually once again done better at the Omni because they had done better at the Omni. It was a non-Starrcade City gate record for the money, but they would have had more people and probably more money because they could have kept the same ticket prices, I think, and just done it inside. But anyway, that was the Road Warriors and Baby Doll over me in the Midnight in a cage, as well as Dusty and Flair. That's where Dusty beat Flair, right? For the fucking, no, he beat him the week before. He beat him again there, but he beat him for the title the week before in Greensboro, right? Yeah, wherever the fuck.
How often in 86 are you flying commercial? Like, do you have enough miles to upgrade if you wanted to, or are you not flying commercial enough? No,
we started out flying all commercial, and then the plane came along about this time in 86, and we had the one, and then he ended up getting two later on, but we flew commercial a lot at the start, and still sometimes, like the managers, me and JJ would fly commercials, so they make sure they got all the matches there if it was a big card. So yeah, I had enough. You could upgrade back then. For US Air or Delta, it was like if it was under 500 miles, $20 or $30. One had 20, one had 30. Then if it was 500 to 1,000 miles, $40 to $60 or whatever. And by $80, you could upgrade, go across the country. So yeah, we'd do that all the time. And you never needed to buy a plane ticket. I've never had time off to fly anywhere. But if I did once a year with my wife, you never had time to, or you never need to buy a plane ticket. You always had miles. But Ben, that's back when, even though I still hated flying, it was actually possible to do it without wanting to put your hands around somebody's throat every once in a while.
Well, you can get in and out of an airport pretty quickly back then compared to
Oh, good
nowadays.
God. Yeah, and fly with anybody's ticket and just walk on the plane with, a fucking drugs and a jackhammer and, 16 sex toys. But anyway, that was the germ of what became the Great American Bash over the next couple of years, where they toned down on the outdoor shows and they only did them in Charlotte where they needed to do them and one or two other places. And they started doing more events in more towns spread out farther. And we've done those deep dives. So everybody knows that by 88, it was 42 shows in 45 days from fucking Washington and Oregon all the way to Florida and to the Northeast. And it was a death march. But this was pretty fucking hectic. And of the 14 bash events, those grossed $1.9 million, set 9 gate records, and had 2 sellouts. The non-bash events in the month drew about $575,000 with 4 gate records and 6 sellouts. So the non-bashes sold out more often than the bashes. It was hard to sell out those stadiums.
Was anyone talking about 87 already, about the idea of doing it again or doing it bigger?
Well, none. Well, I'm sure Dusty immediately was. The boys were just like, let's get through this thing, right? And we wanted to see what the payoffs were. Here comes the punchline. So the months total, I worked it out because I kept track with the TV tapings and everything. Crockett grossed about $2.5 million in the month of July, and counting August 2nd, right? Which would be a little over 5 these days. He did 13 gate records and 8 sellouts over 30 events. And when we got our checks, I've talked about this before, and it's in the Midnight Express book. Crockett was giving us our regular check every week for the non-bash events and the TV tapings, right? But the bash events, we all knew going in, were going to be paid in one lump sum at a check at the end of the month, right? So Flair's been talking about 14 Starcades. And everybody's rubbing their hands together. And then, of course, when we got the house in Philly, about half of that optimism, about 50%, got geared back a little bit. But we were, waiting to see what the fuck was going to happen, right? So there were 14 bash events. If it would have been 14 Starcades for us, that would have meant we would have made $70,000 because we made $5,000 for the previous Starcade. So we get the bash check with a nice letter from Jimmy Crockett. It was a warm letter of thanks.
He's not known for his warmth.
It said, please find it. And it was a memo form. It wasn't Dear Jim. It was to Jim Cornette from James A. Crockett. Please find enclosed your check for the 1986 Great American Bash in the amount of $17,320. This includes all the July dates and the August 2 Bash in Atlanta. Since we did not pay July on a normal basis, we have calculated your previous July earnings. Added with the enclosed bash check, your total for the entire month is $22,960, underlined. Should you have any questions, see me. So basically, look, motherfucker, I paid you $23,000 in the month of July, which is the equivalent now of a little over 50. And if you got a problem with that, come talk to me, and I'm sure we can arrange for you to go somewhere else and make more money. So,
who would you predict, if you didn't know? Well, who would you say, if you had to guess, would have been someone with a problem that would have gone to see Jim Crockett Jr.?
What, besides Tully?
Would Tully have been the guy?
No, I should. The Road Warriors, I'm sure, probably had a speech or a talk with him. We figured, once again, what the fuck? We just made $23,000 in 1 month, and we are in a position where we're going to be figured into every fucking thing. So it wasn't 14 Starcades, but and actually over the next year, when they solved the problem of they ran more shows in smaller, I shouldn't even say smaller, in indoor buildings instead of these giant stadiums. And even though some of the gates were a little smaller, they didn't go jack up the ticket prices ridiculously. And we end up making pretty as much money just for a little bit more work, more dates. But we ended up doing, and in 88, we did actually better because it was spread over 6 weeks' time. So
what did you do for the month of the last Stampede? How much did you and the Express make?
Hold on. Let me get back in that direction.
obviously it's not fair. It's not a completely fair comparison between the Bash Tour and the last Stampede Tour, but still, just for comparison's sake, in terms of how well you guys actually did.
Okay, goddammit. We're back. We're back on the program.
Okay.
I did not record our pay in the Midnight Express book. I would have to go get my 1984 book and do some mathematics. But the last Stampede, the series with Watts and Junkyard Dog, when Watts came out of retirement in 1984 in April and May, there were 15 Stampede shows and they grossed $807,000. And in the 5 weeks that the Stampede ran across the Mid-South shows, all the Mid-South shows combined grossed $1.2 million. So it was the biggest 5 weeks in Mid-South wrestling history. And that would be the equivalent now of almost $3 million that a regional territory grossed in a 5-week period. So we probably, I mean, I have the paycheck stubs framed and on the wall, but I can't read them from here. I'm going to say we made in the area of close to 20 apiece, 20 grand, which would be comparable to the bashes. But once again, we were getting paid at a higher rate because we were in every main event, and Watts knew that was what was drawing the money in that instance. So except for Dog, I'm sure got more, and Watts got a bunch more. You know, we were the highest paid guys on all those shows. But still, that ain't bad when you can go and make what would amount to between 40 and 50 grand over a little bit over a month's time in a regional territory when there's 12 other promotions doing comparable business or close to operating across the country as well.
So you don't talk about a potential Bash 87, or at least amongst the boys, after the 86 Bash. After it was all over, we got checks. I mean, we figured they'd probably do it again because here's the thing. Dusty did Starrcade first year, and they liked it so much they'd done 83, 84, 85, and we knew they were going to do 86. The Great American Bash goes from one event in 85 to that tour, so I figured they'll do this, but hopefully they'll polish it up a little bit next year, and they did. We'd already done a Crockett Cup, and the thought was so, I mean, it didn't take a genius to figure out that these were probably going to be annual events, except something that, you know, really fucking just sucked hind tit. They probably wouldn't do that again. But at that point in time, except for San Antonio, almost nothing sucked. You know, when you've got high school gyms in Gaffney, South Carolina, selling out days in advance, but you can't draw a house in San Antonio, that tells me just stay away from fucking San Antonio. When did you find out you guys were going to be programmed with the Road Warriors for Starrcade?
Probably, I would say September-ish. Because that would have made, especially because they were gone for a month before Starrcade to go do the Japanese tour for Baba. That's why we were able to be the only ones to injure them and put them out of commission on TV, because they were going to Japan for a month. So, I mean, but we enjoyed working with them because Joe and Mike were both great to work with if you understood that they had to be invincible for their gimmick, and they knew that, and they couldn't work, and they knew that. They had to be invincible, they had to be their gimmick, because elsewise they weren't going to be over. So the Midnight Express were the kind of heels that could take the classic ass whipping and bounce off of them, and the only way we would ever try to get an advantage of any physical kind was if somebody had jumped them from behind or off the top rope or used my racket or 2-on-1 or cheating. And then they'd flop down like a fucking circus seal and sell for you. As long as you cheated and took some advantage over them that was not in fair man-to-man, then they would sell. But they had to be supermen. And they also knew they were getting a big fucking comeback and the guys were going to fly again. And it was a great formula. So we liked working with them and they loved working with us. And plus, Paul was always a babyface manager is hard, especially when you've got a goddamn, the invincible babyface tag team. What do they need a manager for? Well, it grew out of them being heels, and then it became a real life deal, and they were part of the package. So that way, Paul had something to do to keep him busy, so he didn't just stand there looking like a dick while two heels took advantage of his two baby faces. we could always, we had the numbers to match.
All right.
They were lovely to work with. just a box of fluffy ducks. Except in Chicago, their working hometown in front of 15,000 people when they had goosebumps. And in Minneapolis, their shoot hometown when all their bouncer friends were in the front row. But that was back when they were green. But anyway, we knew that they would do it afterwards and or continue to do it on an annual basis. And that was great because the Bunkhouse Stampede, they did that in 85. So they did it again in 86. The more things you could come up with, there were annual events. The more big shows there were, the more big checks we got. So we were quite happy with the whole fucking thing.
When was the first time you heard someone grumbling about Dusty Rhodes winning the Bunkhouse Stampede every year?
Well, I mean, besides Tully, no, it wasn't even grumbling. It was just, it was kind of eye rolling and wouldn't you know who won the pony and kind of snickering and laughing about it because yes, everybody in the Horseman, Dusty's got to win the boot. And Dusty's got to win the bunkhouse thing because that was Dusty's thing. But there wasn't like, I'd like to cut that motherfucker's throat. Dusty never had that kind of heat because all these guys are making this kind of money. So it was the biggest heat that Dusty probably had that he had to negotiate was with the Horsemen in terms of they can only be the fall guys so much and they got to go get the heat back. And JJ mentioned it in one of my Back to the Territories with him. And I think in his book, which was excellent. He was working in the office as Dusty's assistant because of their relationship from Florida, but he was managing Dusty's top heel opponents, the Four Horsemen. So he's riding with them and he sees he's in the matches, sees what's going on. And a lot of times Flair would gripe to him or Tully and Arn would gripe to him. And, basically the thought was, we can't keep lining up like Three Stooges for the triple elbow and the triple slap or whatever, no matter what we do on TV, because if we lose the heat, then we're going to lose this thing. It's not as easy to get back as it is to get it the first time. And so they wanted to get more heat, but at the same time, the people that were coming to the matches live in numbers like this did everything but jump up and down and basically beat off in their seats. I've never seen people jumping up and down as into shit, as screaming and yelling and whatever Dusty'd give the fucking flip-flop and fly and all that stuff. You see the tapes. The people were literally insane with how into this shit they were. So he was giving them what they paid to see, but that's the part of booking and wrestling. It's part of cooking. No one recipe is exactly the right recipe. A lot of them taste good, but when you've really cooked a fucking shitty casserole, right? You can tell. There's more than one right way to do things. So the Horsemen were always afraid that they were going to lose it if they weren't careful. Where Dusty was all about, giving the people what they're paying to fucking see. And so every once in a while, JJ would have to go to Jimmy Crockett and say, well, the two camps are, there's some animosity or some things, but whatever. So then Jimmy Crockett would call Rick and ask Flair to come over to the house and have dinner. And he'd let Rick vent and gripe because Flair had worked there longer than Dusty, and Flair was Crockett's cash cow, and he knew that. So he would let Flair vent, and he would promise to take it back to Dusty. And then at the same time, Dusty Rhodes is this booking genius that's, enabled his company is going to gross $20 million that fucking year. So he'll have Dusty come over to dinner and he'll impart some of Flair's concerns like there's some of his. So Dusty knows to back up just a tad. And that was the way they negotiated through all that shit. But it wasn't a bunch of guys in a locker room going, I'd like to cut Dusty Rhodes' throat for not pushing me or whatever. No, that was ludicrous. They were the underneath guys were very happy to be there.
Yeah. Plus, no one started threatening to cut people's throats until you in WCW.
Well, yeah. And then, well, that's the first time I'd ever run into throats that deserved to be cut. And, so everybody's making all this money and everything. And then 2.5 years later, TBS owns the thing. Greensboro's doing $11,000. And everybody hates to go to fucking work, even though they're getting paid guarantees. But that was that first 86 Bash tour established that we didn't just have to do a big event in one specific location. We can brand a tour and we can go all over the country and we can run a lot of these fucking buildings and do well in many of them. And that's what they did for the next couple of years.
The summer of 86 is really remarkable because you have all this going on. And then, of course, that's Hogan versus Orndorff, which is, I think, the biggest Hulk Hogan program he ever had in terms of arena shows. So,
yeah, they did 60-something thousand people in Toronto for that exhibition stadium show.
So both promotions are on fire at this period of time.
But if you go back and look, I still maintain, go back and look at the WWF crowds, go back and look at the NWA crowds. And who's hotter? The WWF crowds are smiling and happy. The NWA crowds are jumping up and down, screaming and yelling, either wanting to kill somebody or acting like they have just orgasmed in their shorts. We had them by the fucking nuts. They just had the WWF snatched them by the hair a little. We had them right by the fucking nuts.
Well, maybe that's why they were orgasming.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, let go.
Hey, I all summer long in 86, all I did was grip my racket. All right, and following the Costanza rule, ladies and gentlemen, I got boxes and envelopes to pack and books to sign and things, so we're going to get out of here. Next week, you know what we're doing next week, don't you, kid?
I know. It's what I have to do Saturday night.
We're going to watch and report on, what is it? Is it All Out, All In, All...
It's all out. The first one was All In, and then the second one was Double or Nothing. And now it's All Out, as in we're all out of ideas.
I was about to say, it sounds to me like they're bidding us farewell and adieu. Goodbye, farewell, amen from All Elite Wrestling. I don't know, but anyway, are they going to get it right? Are they going to get it wrong? Are they going to get it in between? Our thoughts and observations on that program next week and so much more. And once again, the books are on their way. In many cases, hundreds of pounds have been shipped. There are hundreds of pounds that will be shipped over the next few days. And then next week, international folks, begins your journey with Cornette's Collectibles. It's going to be an international week, and we're going to get that taken care of. And one of these old months, I'm gonna sit down in a chair and sip a ice cold lemonade.
So next week's International Week, followed by what? Infrastructure Week?
It may be all the structures have fallen down around here. I've got to do some maintenance. Anyway, all that and more next week, and even less the following week. And I hope you enjoyed the deep dive. And now we got to start talking about football betting now, you and I, because we'll take this ride with us, folks. Get the coupon code, do the whole thing, go to my bookie, and let's see if we can all make some money. I'm making so much money now I don't even count it. I just weigh it. How many pounds of money do you think my bookie can make me?
Promo code JCE. I'm not sure how many pounds.
Well, we'll figure that out.
I don't think I have a true appreciation of the weight of money. Like, how many dollars is a pound?
You'd have a lot of money if you had a pound of dollars.
Wow.
That's sort of like Frank Morrell said to me one time when I was a rookie in the business and complaining about getting a $50 payoff. He said, "Son, did you ever see $50 worth of ham and eggs on a plate?" I don't know what the fuck that means, but it sounded profound enough that I quit bitching about the $50.
Couldn't have a good match in an iron lung. What does that mean?
According to Chief Jay Strongbow. All this and so much more next week on the program, ladies and gentlemen. Until then, for Brian, I'm Jim. Thank you. Fuck you. Don't buy the book. It's sold out. Bye-bye, everybody.